Hi, everybody. My name is Eugene Turk. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Align, and I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar. For those of you who may not be aware, Align puts on a monthly webinar where we have thought speakers from around the world share their knowledge, expertise, and wisdom in the hopes that some of this meaningful content will help you grow and scale your business. This month, we are thrilled and honored to have the growth guy himself, Verne Harnish, with a presentation on the fundamentals of execution, the 3 disciplines for driving success in 2023 as we come into the end of this year and look forward to what we're going to get done next year. Verne has spent the last 3 decades helping companies grow, scale, and succeed. For those of you who don't know, he's the founder of the Entrepreneurs Organization, which now has, I think, more than 14,000, maybe even 15,000 members worldwide. And for 15, even more, maybe. Yes. And for 15 years, he chaired EO's premier CEO program, The Birthing of Giants, held at MIT, a program in which he still teaches today. Verne is obviously the founder and CEO of Scaling Up, a global executive education and coaching company with more than 200 coaching partners on 6 continents, some of whom I see have joined us this morning. So it's all nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. Of course, he's also the author of multiple best-selling books, including Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, which was just reissued as a 20th anniversary edition, and Scaling Up Rockefeller Habits 2.0, which I think has now been translated into probably more than 20 languages and has won numerous international book awards, including the prestigious International Book Award for Best General Business Book. That's Verne. He's obviously somebody we all recognize and we know, and we are here to hear his thoughts. But before we begin, just one administrative matter. We want this to be as educational and informational for all of you as possible. So to the extent that you may have a question, please feel free to pose those questions using the chat or the Q&A feature, and we will direct as many of those questions as we have time for at the conclusion of Verne's presentation. So again, thank you everybody for attending today's webinar. And without further delay, I will turn the presentation over to Verne. Thanks, Verne.
Well, you're welcome, Eugene. Thank you. And I want to thank everybody for taking time here to dial in. Man, we got some crazy times going on. In fact, I don't know if you guys heard the news. I thought I'd give you an update, but many of you might be familiar with 50 Cent, the rapper. Well, he has just changed his name to 85 Cent to adjust for inflation. And look, whether we're going to have a recession or not, inflation is here. Supply chain challenges, we're still suffering it from paper and trying to get books in print and all of that. And so this is a time here in December as we go into what I consider the traditional planning period for us to really get ready for 2023 and beyond. And I think Jim Collins was right. Whatever happens, I think it's going to be chaotic throughout this entire time. And so that's why we develop these tools. You know, entrepreneurs live this crazy life anyway. And so I want to dig on into it. And I thought when we come back to inflation that Warren Buffett chose to address it at his recent meeting when he gathered in Omaha. And he said, look, the best protection against inflation is your own skills. And so the fact that you're taking this time here to invest in your own skills and hopefully pick up a couple of ideas that are going to help you really power through the end of this year into next, I really do want to thank you for taking this time. And the challenge is this: we've got 11,000 startups every hour in the world. We're not hurting for new companies. A lot of those are in India and elsewhere, but we have way too few that are scaling up, and particularly scaling up successfully. And so our framework is one that we didn't just make up. I've been close friends with Jim Collins for all these years. Jim is actually right here in Boulder, Colorado, and he did the heavy lifting research around, all right, what does it take to go from good to great? By the way, in public companies, he set a standard of kind of 3 times industry average growth of the stock market. For privately held companies, family owned, many of those I'm sure that are on this broadcast, that is 3 to 5 times industry average profitability. So whatever the average profitability is in your industry, through really the application of our tools, we've been so excited. And we put an article out almost every single week on scaleups.com of how companies using these tools have been able to achieve that 3 to 5 times industry average profitability, even while growing. And he said, look, if you want to go from good to 3 times good, you've really got to go through these kind of 3 areas. You have to have disciplined people engaged in disciplined thought through disciplined action. Later on, then he began to address the issue of cash in his, what I consider his best book, Great by Choice. And so that's where this framework came out of. Disciplined people, disciplined thought is where you set strategy. Obviously, disciplined action is then where you execute. And look, you can get by with decent people strategy execution, but not a day without cash. And as he said in his Great by Choice, that those companies that he saw scaled further faster had 10 to 20 times their competitors' equivalent cash, either access to or on reserve, because look, when things go bad, you're going to need cash to survive. And when things go well, you've got opportunity. You need the cash to take advantage of it. And so if you've got a chance to read just one chapter of Jim's, go to the Return on Luck in Great by Choice. And one of the key things that you've got to focus on in each one of those areas is to be different. If you're hiring the same people as everyone else, you're really not different. If you're pricing the same way everyone else is, you're really not different. If you're delivering their product or service in roughly the same way everyone else is, you're not different. And your ability to find unique sources of cash in order to fuel your rocket ship, that's really the essence of being successful in scaling up. And so, look, if there's an image that I can burn into your brain, it's this one we've got right here on the screen. And that is to find the blue ocean in every one of those areas of the business. And by the way, it doesn't matter the industry that you're in. We thought that the automobile was going to put the horse out of business, yet it has been a thriving $300 billion global industry. It's been the second fastest entertainment growing industry in the UK, for instance. All they ended up having to do was pivot. I love these 2 images. Here is the horse then, beast of burden. Here is the horse now. And as they said, well played, horse, well played. And that's what we want to achieve for you through these tools. Our ultimate goal for the CEO and the senior team is for us to reduce by 80% the time it takes for you to really manage the business. In my opening chapter called The Barriers, right after our summary, I feature Alan Rudy, and I remember meeting Alan the first time. He was a student of mine at that MIT program. He was running a company called ExpressMed, and he literally was working 80-hour weeks and still not getting it all done. Once he put our tools in place, he was able to back that off to about 8 hours, the time it took for him, ultimately then to 4 hours. There's maybe the 4-hour work week, but the time it took for him to manage the business so that then he could spend much more time on the market-facing activities that are absolutely necessary if you're going to scale through this next decade. What does that mean then? You've got to get the rest of your 10 or 10,000 employees aligned and on the same page. At the time, Alan had about 450 employees. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is to have the page on which they can get aligned. And the very simple idea here is you just need everybody rowing in the same direction and rowing to the same rhythm. And that therefore is going to save you a lot of time and a lot of money, which are some of the productivity gains that we've got to see, particularly as talent has really tightened up in the marketplace. You've got to be driving on revenue per employee, or even better, gross margin dollars per employee. And to do that, we've got to run much more effectively and efficiently. And so that starts by getting everybody on the same page. And our summary of our traditional one-page strategic plan, which is really the worksheet that we hope that you take. I've updated it in the 20th anniversary of Mastering the Rockefeller Habits and in Scaling Up. You want to use that worksheet to get all of those answers, and there are right and wrong answers to every one of the boxes that are critical on that form. But we found it wasn't really friendly as a document to share with the rest of the team or even investors or others that you want to get involved with your organization. And so there we came up with the vision summary. So it truly is a single page. And it is really highlighted at the top with the four most important kind of vision decisions that you need to make, which is, first of all, where are you headed over this next decade, that big, hairy, audacious goal? And remember, we have a tendency to way overestimate what we can accomplish in a year as you look into 2023. And we way underestimate, as Bill Gates said, what we can accomplish in 10 years. And I open actually the new edition of Scaling Up. It's been revised as well with 3 amazing stories of entrepreneurs that were able to significantly exceed their BHAGs that were set at not 10x, but 30x where they had started and had been beat in many cases by 2 years or more. And so you want to anchor this plan with where you're going to be headed over the next 10 to 20 years. You then want to get clear. What are the rules of the game? That's our core values, that there's a purpose bigger than, I think, just making some folks rich, and that we are very clear what the boundaries are. Who is our core customer, and what are the 3 things, and particularly the one that we're going to lead with, that we're going to make sure we deliver on. And if we've picked a unique kind of core customer and we've brought to them kind of a unique offering of what we think satisfies their needs and we can deliver on it, then you're going to get that word of mouth that becomes so critical. Then underneath that, you have a chance, as you can see there, to set what is our priority then for the next quarter, our next year, and the next 3 to 5 years. And at the bottom of that form is a place then for everybody to be able to sit down here at the end of the year as we set up for 2023 and say, all right, if that is the direction of the company, then what is it that I need to do individually or as a team in order to contribute? And if we go back to an employee engagement, one of the key things that Gallup's research found is that if everybody has what's called clear line of sight, I can see how what I'm working on, toiling away at a daily, weekly basis, how it ties to the goals of the organization, the engagement of people goes up tremendously. And that becomes critical as you're going to execute here in 2023. By the way, if you want to get some background and some more detail information around doing this, we've got our masterclass coming up. It's 3 hours on December 14th. It's 3 hours on December 15th. So it's about 90 minutes each for people, strategy, execution, and cash. And it's virtual, so you can dial in from anywhere. And then we've got a CEO only session for 90 minutes on December 13th that's included as part of the price. Now, if we do it all right, here are the results of really nailing the execution of this plan. And that is, first, we really want to be able to increase dramatically your cash flow. You're going to sleep a lot better and age much slower if you've got cash. Number 2, generate that 3 to 5 times industry average profitability. That is the measure of greatness. And by the way, if you do these 2, then the overall valuation of the organization is going to be much higher, whether you plan to exit sometime in the future or you need that enterprise value in order to borrow money or do acquisitions yourself. And look, we know these metrics are critical, but we also want to deliver just some more fun. Let's enjoy this climb as we scale the organization with a whole lot less drama than if you don't have these tools in place. And one of our examples of that is the gentleman now who's running our global coaching organization, John Ratliff. You know, a lot of people want to talk about Apple, and I'm a huge Steve Jobs fan. My kids kid me a lot about what a fanboy I am of what he's achieved. But look, he ended up creating the largest market cap company in the world. And a great measure of a leader is, what does a company achieve when you're not there? And we've seen the results over the last decade. But John ran a company called Apple Tree. It's in the call center business. I consider those kind of the sweatshops of the information age. And in an industry that averaged literally 200%, whoop, I just see my zero that fell down there, 200% turnover. And that was average in the industry. John took that to a record-setting 18%. Now, one of the things that we talk about in your plan is try to find what we call your 10x. Where's your internal 10x advantage over the competition? It's usually invisible, though felt by your customers. The competition usually is not aware that you have this advantage, and I wouldn't be advertising it. But this is the thing that gives you that winning advantage in the marketplace. And by the way, because John was able to figure this out using our tools, he took an industry that averaged 4% profitability. Look, you can get people answering your phones anywhere in the world. He took that to an industry record-setting 21.8%. And up until just last year, he was beating Apple by 1% as a profitability percentage, and he's in the call center business. Apple beat him out slightly last year at 22%. And so look, if you can achieve this in the call center industry, you can achieve it in any industry. Again, like with the horse, all you might have to do is just pivot. And as a result, a $2 billion company came along and offered him 14 times earning. That's a public company multiple for a privately held organization. And that's the kind of valuations that we want to be able to drive. The key, though, is to have the right mindset. And I really would check in with your team as you're going into 2023, and particularly with yourself. I actually had somebody ask me this question yesterday. Am I coasting? Am I playing not to lose? And we've seen that right now in the World Cup and with the NFL over this last weekend. They actually did research in the World Cup that teams that had a lead that began then to take the pedal off the metal ended up losing that match 86% of the time. And so first, are you really ready to win here in 2023 and beyond? And it ultimately comes down to, I think, making sure that you're working on the right question. Look, you're all wicked smart. Folks that are willing to take the time to kind of tune in for something like this are really of the mindset you want to win, that you want to learn. My concern is that you may be working on, though, the wrong question. Look, we have the answers, all the answers. It's the question we do not know. And that's part of what our strategic planning process and all of our one-page tools do, is they really get you and your team to be asking the right questions. And to the extent that you can't put an answer in that box, that should give you a clue maybe where you need to look next. So it ultimately comes down to this. What is the ultimate priority that we need to individually and as an organization work on today? What is our sprint that we've got to complete this week or the next 2 weeks? What is our theme for the next 90 days? And what is that critical number that we need to hit at the end of 2023? By the way, I might back up just for a second. We talk about the importance of setting themes and particularly giving them names. And I finally kind of struck me this analogy that having a priority for the quarter and not giving it a name is like writing a book and not naming the book, or putting together a movie and not giving the movie a name. It's powerful for you to be able to name things so everybody can first refer to it. You can in shorthand, instead of saying, hey, did you see the movie about? You can just give it the name, and it provides that real energetic focus that the organization needs. And if I look at a critical question that we've been addressing, not just in the US, but around the world, it's like, all right, where is the safest place for us to hang out if you just don't want to die? And I've had audiences tell me home, or they've named a certain city or whatever. But what's interesting, it's on a commercial airliner. Thank goodness, knock on wood, because I'm traveling 250,000 miles a year. And I think it's interesting, between 2000 and 2009, if we take out that black swan moment of 9/11, 231 deaths on aircraft, thousands on the ground, we had essentially 11 crashes and 247 deaths. So if we average it out, it's about a crash a year and roughly 25 deaths. Now, that is tragic in and of itself, but let me provide some comparisons. Just in the United States, 60 people a year die from a lightning strike. Look, you're not going to be safer having lunch and risk choking or walking down the street, or for sure not being in an automobile. Yet, what did they achieve over the next 10 years? And to me, this is impressive. It was 100-fold improvement, and I'm so thankful for it. Just 2 fatal crashes and 2 deaths. One of those being the first in Southwest Airlines history. Remember that fan blade came off, the engine came through the window and sucked that woman out. Tragic, particularly again for Southwest Airlines, who had a flawless safety record for 50 years. And what is at the heart of this? By the way, I can tell you where it's not safe to be, and that is the hospital. Whatever happens, you make sure they have to drag you kicking and screaming going there, because people who go to hospitals die, and not from what it is that they went in from. The third leading cause of death in the United States is medical error. By the way, somebody asked me, why has the airline industry been able to make such monumental improvements in what is a very complex technology soaring through the air in all kinds of weather. And the medical community's not been able to get their arms around errors. And somebody, I think, tongue in cheek said, it's because the pilot's going down with you, your doctor's not. And so I don't want to make any suggestions here, but I hope our healthcare industry can really get their arms around this. And that has been of concern to this medical doctor, Atul Gawande, who wrote what Bill Gates considered one of the best business books ever, and that is the Checklist Manifesto. And we're here to talk about execution, about getting things right. And what he wrote about in this book is the first industry that got checklists was the commercial airline industry. Your real indication that you've got to tighten things up is that you've got drama, whether it's hiring people, retaining people, delivering products, your supply chain challenges. What you're trying to do is create a drama-free organization. And that's what you want if you're flying on a commercial airliner. The industry has been looking at next, obviously, is the medical industry. And one of the leading causes of death is you pick up an infection from that main line that's being entered in you when you go into the hospital. And what he discovered is if the doctors and nurses would just follow a 4-step checklist, the Detroit hospital system was the first to adopt it. They were able to take infection rates not down to 0.0, down to 0. Yet they've not been able to get that industry to adopt them like the airline industry because of really 3 letters, EGO, the ego. And they had to get doctors and nurses, their egos in check, where like they've been able to do with commercial pilots and the crew through what they call CRM, or crew resource management, which is their ability to know how to communicate whenever there is a crisis. And so that's why we created the Rockefeller Habits Checklist. Look, you're piloting your organization, and what you want to make sure is that you're doing everything on this list. How would you like it if the mechanic said, all right, I'm just going to do the fun parts? We like to say that the professional does it all. The amateurs do just the fun parts. I want every pilot, I want every mechanic to follow every item on that checklist. And we think that's critical as well. Now, if you don't, it doesn't mean you're going to crash. You're just leaving a lot of money and time on the table. And it's going to create a lot more drama in the organization, which ultimately can hurt your ability to retain both employees and customers. And so I want to kind of turn to Scott Fuqua. I actually moved his endorsement from the back of the book to the front. Henry McGovern, who was there, has retired from AmRest. Scott's still at the helm, he and Mike, scaling up Atlassian. And they first joined us when they had about 50 employees in 2005. Today, they have over 5,000. Back then, they were just getting started. Today, they've got, as of this morning, a market cap of about 30 billion. And when I was communicating just last week with Scott, he said, look, Verne, I let him know that his quote had gone on the front of the book. He said, look, I recommend your book to somebody probably every month. And he said, look, at the heart of it, what we learned from that book were these 2 things that are necessary for us to scale without drama. And that is the importance of discipline and focus. And so that's what I want to dig into is what are these fundamental disciplines, these 3 disciplines that are necessary for you to execute once you've got this plan put in place. And again, I hope you're going to take the time, both personally with our 1-page personal plan and professionally for the company. And so if you ever get lost, you can always come back to these 3 fundamental disciplines that I first outlined in my book 20 years ago, Mastering the Rockefeller Habits. And if you're not accomplishing what it is that you want to accomplish as easy as you thought it was going to be, then it's one of 3 things. First, we're either working on too many things or we're working on the wrong priority. A week ago, Saturday, I attended the life celebration of the late now George Native. George was the founder of Boston Chicken, of what became KinderCare, and many, many other companies. He actually would be my opening speaker every year for that 15 years I ran that program at MIT. He then took the second slot after I left. They'd let me open and he would follow. And one of the most famous kind of images that George would leave us all with is that ultimately you can't sit on 2 toilets. And I've never forgot that graphic. So many of the thousands of entrepreneurs that have heard George talk can still recall that, as well as many of his other stories. But I think it's a good lesson that one of the things that crushes us is having too many priorities in any one day, week, quarter, year, or even over the next 10 years. And so what is that priority around which we need to get everybody aligned? But the only way we're going to know what that is if we've got the intel, the data. Look, all wars and all markets are won through firsthand intel. That is, what's the market saying to us? What are the employees picking up? They're there on the front line, picking up a lot of clues. Are we able then to gather that both quantitative, the KPIs, and the qualitative, that feedback from customers and employees, and then look at it to give us that clarity and foresight? I thought one of the great stories over this last month was the 30-year-old Dylan Field, who just sold his company for $20 billion to Adobe. He was a Peter Thiel scholar. Peter paid him $100,000 to drop out of college to go pursue his dream. In this case, to build a more collaborative, creative space with a lot of the same tools at Adobe. And Adobe obviously had to just buy him in order to protect their market share. And when they asked Dylan, what was the real key to you being able to scale and exit for $20 billion by age 30 and be able to beat Adobe in the marketplace? He said, look, I would just spend my weekends reading support tickets. In other words, he every week was getting direct intel from what was going on from the marketplace with his technology that he was building. I often ask audiences, how many of you got your business started using Quicken or QuickBooks? And they've got 86% market share of the 32 million small businesses that we've got just in the United States. And look, Microsoft tried to beat them in the marketplace by giving away a competitive product. Right now, Netscape has got all kinds of radio ads that they're running to say that they're better than Quicken and QuickBooks. But look, at the heart of their success is something that Scott Cook, their founder, put in place almost from day one, and that is what they call a Follow Me Home program. 500 times a year, roughly twice a day, somebody goes directly to a customer's site and watches them utilize the software. And particularly when they've got a new update coming out and they're watching every move, every eyebrow, every hesitation, and they're noting if there's something that's not particularly easy or is confusing, and they go back and they get that fixed. That kind of direct market intel is what allowed Hubert Joly to turn around Best Buy. I named his book #1 last year, The Heart of Business. And it was because of something he changed that we changed an agenda in our weekly meeting. And that is, he would not start any management or leadership meeting without first reporting out, what is it that we're hearing from the marketplace, from customers and our employees? And so that's the data and metrics that you need. And by the way, once you have that input, you know what the priority is. But it does you no good to have that information if you don't get in a room and talk about it. And look, if you want to move faster, you need to pulse faster, which is one of the reasons why we're so well known for the daily huddle. At our recent summit that we had in Denver, we had a chance to host Martha McSally. She is the first woman to ever fly combat and to lead a squadron into combat. And one of the things she shared with our audience is what she calls the 61 rule, which says, look, we know as a fighter pilot that if we're off just 1 degree, that in 60 seconds, we will miss the target by a mile. And that's why ultimately you've got to decide, all right, where do we want to be over the next 12 months? And then we have got to course correct on a daily basis. And that's why that daily huddle and our weekly meeting and our monthly gathering and our quarterly planning becomes so critical, because that's then when you get in a room, you look at the data, the intel, and then you decide, all right, what is the most important thing I have to do today, the sprint for the week, the theme for the quarter, and again, the critical number for the year. And so let me just share a few examples of this. So Just as the pandemic was coming on, I had been invited in to the headquarters of Steelcase. They're in Grand Rapids, Michigan, about a $4 billion manufacturer of office furniture. And they were in real trouble in the year 2000. And they got a new CEO, Jim Hackett, and a guy named Bob Hendrickson, who was running their global factories, had discovered my book, Mastering the Rockefeller Habits. Well, let's speed forward 20 years later. They were able to go from 12 million square feet, delivering 4 billion in revenue, to 1 million square feet. That was a 12-fold increase. There was their internal 10x that has allowed them to really power forward. And so on the 20th anniversary of them using the tools, they invited me in and they wanted to show me how everything was still alive around these three disciplines. First, that all 3,000 employees were within eyeshot of a whiteboard. Notice, not anything fancy, but you could see first across the top, there are 4 key areas of focus. Safety, clearly, as a manufacturer, quality, delivery, and cost. But even with all 4 of those, that year they chose to focus, notice the red arrow there, on quality. Then you notice down the side, they've got the priorities across, the data, and then what are the actions that we're going to take today based on what it is that we've learned. And when it comes then to communication, they actually had it written there that, look, everyone in the factory's got bicycles. If we need to talk about anything, it is much better first that we get face-to-face. At least let's do a video call with each other. Notice email is last resort. And they gave a theme, a name to the priority around quality, and that was to banish sloppiness. By the way, they just stole it from the title of Paul Auker's book, Banish Sloppiness. Paul is their consultant in the quality lean area. So they said, quality is our focus. Let's go find the smartest guy that we can in the world in that field. They then brought on Paul Auker's and they said, hey, let's just take his book title as our theme. But here we've got a $4 billion company that is still staying focused on these key fundamentals as they continue to power forward. And I got to sit in or stand in for their daily huddle is at 9 a.m. and at 3 p.m. because they're running 2 shifts. Notice all the electronic dashboards that they've got, scorecards up where everybody can see it. The meeting, by the way, is 7 minutes. And at the end of that 7 minutes, they have the most rude sounding bell that goes off. You don't want to hear it. So it really drives them to finish this meeting on time. And as John Ratliff found, who wouldn't have thought to scale Appletree without every one of his 650 employees in some kind of a daily huddle, including his 13 executives, he found as Steelcase that every minute in a daily huddle will save you 10 minutes. And so a 7-minute daily huddle is saving every one of the leadership team you see there over an hour of what would be emails and phone calls and other communication that we would have to do asynchronously versus just get in a room and get aligned. Now, that's in manufacturing. Let me take you to the whole other end, professional services, and this PE firm called K1. Neil Malik is the YPOer who leads this. And not only do they require every one of the companies that they acquire to read Pat Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of the Team, but they're all given copies of Scaling Up. Those are the 2 books that are sent to every company that they acquire. But not only do they require the 120 companies in their portfolio to practice these, by the way, when they bring somebody on, they send their CEO and number 2 to our CEO boot camp. We just had a couple of them in our boot camp that we held in Vail here recently. He is using these tools in order to run his own organization. And right here, Pax, I'm going to show a video. I'll speak over it. So you might pull me off the screen. But first of all, they wouldn't think to operate their organization. Is that all of a sudden the video stopped? Okay, there it is in some kind of a daily huddle. Notice very informal people sitting around, standing up, just communicating. Very, very short. And then once a week, they have an all-firm meeting where they're essentially reviewing all their companies in their portfolio. Now, it's really a time for talk time, not people going through Excel spreadsheets, because all of their data is up big and visible where everybody can see it, which creates a real culture of transparency and accountability, which is why they're one of the best performing PE firms, not only in the United States, but the world. It allowed them to actually raise another $10 billion in the pandemic in order to continue to fuel their future moving forward. So it works at the professional services firm. And then if we go to retail, just had a nice exchange with Sanjeev Mahanti. He was recently here in the news. He was given the inevitable, I think, job of being the MD for Benetton India. Now, this was a dying brand that was low in terms of fashion brands in India, where Levi Strauss had been number one for decades. So he brought us in, began to implement these tools. And one of the key things he did is we realized that he had no intel, no real data coming from the 104 stores he had across India. In some sense, the leadership team in planning was just making stuff up. And so what he did is he put a card next to every one of the cash registers at those 104 stores. And it simply said, look, if you've got an idea, suggestion, concern, thought, I want you to email it directly to me. There was his picture. There was his email address. And by the way, it was as much for the employees he had in those 104 stores as it was for the customers. Now, he'll tell you honestly up front, he didn't think he would, we'd get an email a day. To his surprise, he began to get on average 200 a day. His customers and employees had a lot of intel that they wanted to share. And so he did three things. First, he put a team together that obviously looked at every one of those emails and responded accordingly. And that really started to create that kind of loyalty that you need in a marketplace. Wow, this organization is responsive to what my concerns are. And one thing we've learned, John did the same thing at Appletree, is that if you've made a mistake and you correct it with the customer, that'll often create more loyalty than if you never made the mistake in the first place. So first, he made sure all of them were responded to. Number two, he looked at every one of the subject lines of those 200 emails, very much like Warren Buffett's looking at the headlines of newsprint all over the world to get a good gut feel for what the market's going to do. Finally, Sanjeev started to get a good gut feel for what was going on in his marketplace and with his employees on a daily basis. Can you imagine getting 200 bits of data? And then number three, he would then choose one that particularly caught his attention. He would email the person back and say, hey, MD of Managing Director of Benetton India, would love to have a phone call. And he was surprised how many of them would want to. And that's when he would really get some in-depth insight to changes that he needed to make. My favorite story, it's a Saturday, and an email comes in and the subject line is like, acid wash jeans are falling apart. And clearly that concerned him. And when he looked at the name, it looked like this person was like one of the leaders, political leaders of India, one of the ministers. And so he emails the guy back. Sure enough, he agrees to have a phone call. It is who he thought it was. And first, he realized he must have had a manufacturing problem with that batch of jeans. He was able to message out to all 104 stores to get those pulled immediately, so no other customers were going to have this bad experience. He built a beautiful relationship or bridge with a leader within India. And more importantly, within 24 months, he rocketed from a no-name to the #1 fashion brand in India. That allowed him then in 2019 to win the Retail Icon Award of India, put him on the map. And by the way, who did he upset with this? Well, obviously, Levi Strauss. So what did they do? They hired him to run the entire eastern region of Levi Strauss, half the globe. He's now, the reason we were in communication, has been moved back now to the United States. You saw that they had just put a new woman in place as CEO. And Sanjeev has been moved to San Francisco to run now all of North America. I know they're probably grooming him for a future leadership position. And so whether it's manufacturing, professional services, or in retail, I don't care the industry or where it is on the globe as we've made the tour, at the heart of it are really these three fundamental disciplines. And that is, are you getting in a room and are you talking about the right stuff? Do you have the real intel that then inform you the priorities that we need to set, again, today, this week, this quarter, and this year? Now, I want to share as a side note, kind of a new acronym that we are pivoting to. A lot of folks, when it comes to goal setting, which you should be doing right now for 2023, have used this idea that it needs to be SMART. We've really enjoyed this upgrade that MIT Sloan School suggested, which is that maybe the goal needs to be FAST, because almost all the SMART part of the acronym dealt directly with the goal. But as you see here, the F stands for first. The importance of not setting a goal and setting it on the shelf, but making sure that it's being frequently discussed, that it is front and center of everyone's thinking on a daily and weekly basis. Number two, that is an ambitious goal. The research, by the way, is clear. You're the chief energy officer. If a company's total energy is greater than the competition, that's a real advantage in the marketplace. And attainable goals, the research finds, is very low energy, or ridiculous goals are low energy. It's kind of a bell curve. What you want to do is find that apex where the goal is ambitious enough that it provides some excitement in the organization, but not so difficult that everybody knows they can't achieve it. Obviously, it needs to be specific so you can measure it. And then, as we saw in that video, that it then drives some transparency in the organization because it is visible to everyone. And that's why we think it's important that you get scoreboards up. Look, you wouldn't expect to attend any sporting event without big, massive scoreboards. And that was the first thing Naomi Simpson did when she set her big, hairy, audacious goal in that same class that Scott attended in 2005. And that was to try to sell 2 million experiences. At the time, she'd only sold 7,500. That was going to be a 30x growth. By the way, in my opening introduction of the new edition of Scaling Up, she shares that she really thought when they said it that it was a ridiculous goal, but she beat it by 2 years. She has now set an equally aggressive 30x goal to go from 100 million to 3 billion. But it's actually to go from one experience every 34 seconds to one experience every second delivered sustainably. That's going to be a 34x growth between 2020 and 2030. It's going to put her on course to be at about $250 million next year. And she's already said, you know what? I think we're going to beat it by, again, 2 years. But what's at the heart of it is not only does she have that, but she's got all of her data and information, as you saw at K1, up, big, and visible, and available on people's mobile devices as well, so that wherever she is, she can log in like you can the score of what's going on at the World Cup or the NFL playoffs right now. You can be up to date real time with every error, every ace, every yellow card, every goal, who shot it, at what time that was scored. You should have the same visibility inside your own organization. That's then what drives that winning spirit, and for you to be able to achieve those almost impossible, big, hairy, audacious goals that you have set. And so that's why we laid out this technology platform we call Align Scoreboard. And it really provides you with, at the cost of 2 Starbucks a day, you're going to provide this kind of transparency and visibility and ability to get it up on big screens to your team, like you would a professional organization. And that's ultimately what it is that we want to achieve, is to professionalize the organization. If we go back to the airline industry, one of the things that's at the heart of their success is that commercial pilots are required to have the most continuous education of any profession, more than doctors, lawyers, accountants, or anyone else. And as such, we think that's why it's critical that you continue to invest in yourself. As Warren Buffett said, it is the best hedge against inflation. And then to make sure that you have laid out precisely what it is that we need to achieve, and that it's being measured and it's being tracked and paid attention to. Because ultimately, it's this set of routines that are what will set you free. And your ultimate success, both personally and professionally, is simply the sum total of decisions that you make and you get the people and ultimately the market to make on an hour by hour, day by day, year by year basis that drives your success. And so that's really the essence of why we put together these tools around making sure that we've got the disciplined people engaged in the disciplined thought around strategy through disciplined action, which what Jim Collins said is that's where you want to begin to apply technology. That is your real multiplier if you're going to drive discipline. It's what drives the success now in the airline industry. Much of those checklists are built into the software, so it's doing its self-check in order to keep us safe. And then look, you can get by with decent people, decent strategy, decent execution, but not a day without cash. And so with that, I wish you a successful end to 2022 and that some of these tools set you up for success as you move into 2023. Eugene, back to you.
Thank you, Verne. As always, an overwhelming amount of information, real world examples. It's just, it never ends. It's really an unbelievable presentation. Thank you, Verne. Again, for those of you who have questions, please feel free to pose those in the chat or the Q&A. I guess I'll start the questions by just asking you, sort of, obviously, it's something that's probably on the mind of lots of business owners or people who are working with companies is, all of this talk about a pending recession. There's a recession coming if it isn't here already. Just sort of help us better understand, 2023 might be a different or a difficult business economy to sort of grow and scale. Just thoughts on that and how this sort of disciplined approach might help us weather that storm that's coming.
Well, I think given the size of our companies, Eugene, the macroeconomic movements shouldn't be that critical. I know they're going to have some kind of impact, but let me give you a perspective. First, the OECD came out and was reported by Fortune a week ago that we're going to finish 2022 at a 3.1% growth rate, and they are projecting a 2.2% growth rate for 2023. And so they've come out and said, we don't even see a recession. Goldman and all of those guys have pushed it off now to fourth quarter 2023 when they had said we were likely going to hit it in 2022. So look, I don't think anybody knows. Number two, just to give you a perspective in terms of total dollars out there in the marketplace for you to grab a hold of. In the year 2000, turn of the century, the global GDP was about 34 trillion. Let's speed forward. We're going to finish, I don't know where we're going to be in 2022, but 2021, we were at 94.5 trillion. We were almost 3 times what it was in the year 2000. And so if the economy were to drop by 5%, that would be considered a great recession, if not a depression. Our global GDP would just be at what it was, 88 trillion in 2019, which was supposed to be a banner year for business. And so my view is with 94.5 trillion or whatever it ends up being in 2023, if you can't find the million or the billion out of that, then it's your fault. The constraints between your ears are somewhere in your business model. And that's what we want to be able to help you uncover. And again, you're going to have much better clues at what that is if you've got the data flowing and it's up, visible and transparent, like we can all see the stats of any professional sports player, as well as the coaches. We're able then to make very quick adjustments, call audibles, make changes in the huddle when they see changes on the field. You're going to be able to do the same, particularly if you've got that daily huddle in place and you're gathering the market intel. Last thing I would suggest is there's always winners in even recessions. And so what you want to do is make sure that you're going after those customers in your market that are going to be the most profitable. Remember, you're not going for market share, you're going for profit share. So pick the right customers.
Verne, we just had a question come in. Let me read it. How do you go to microcap companies? I'm not sure I understand the question. I'll read it. The question was from Suman, who asks, how do you grow microcap companies with a market cap of, say, $5 million to a $35 million company or even bigger with no trading volume? I'm not sure I understand that last part of it, but maybe that means something to you, Verne?
Yeah, it's weird. The market is fickle. Sebastian just let me know that the company we featured in Scaling Up Compensation, Ike, they went public 3 years into their launch of the firm. They were only 3 million in revenue. Had a market cap coming out of that 80 million. It already hit 134 million just earlier this year. And then the market's fallen out from underneath that. But so as it has for Google and Facebook and Amazon and everybody else. So, what might be necessary is this is a time like Michael Dell did, where if you feel like you've got to make a pivot, Michael took the company back private so he could then make the pivots he needed from manufacturing to services. And then he went back public. And I don't know if any of you guys saw, but that was named the deal of this century. That financial move, which with real changes in the business model. I mean, they're generating 100 million in revenue, 100 billion in revenue, put $50 billion in Michael Dell's pocket. So again, the deal of the century, but it required him to make a move to go private before he could go back public. So that might be what you have to do to go from 5 million to 35 million.
Question that was posed, Verne, you talked about some essential metrics that most companies use. I think one that you mentioned was gross profit dollars per employee. Are there any others that you might suggest to some of our attendees that are truly essential metrics that almost every company should be measuring? Yeah, well, we've got those, Eugene, listed on the one-page strategic plan. That's why those are listed there at the top, particularly of the quarterly column and the one-year column. There are a lot of the inputs that go into our cash flow story software that all of our coaching partners have access to, where you can put your simple financial statements in there, and they can do very quick what-if questions around 7 levers that can dramatically increase your profitability and your cash flow. So first, I would encourage everyone that's on this broadcast to get in touch with one of our coaching partners. It's for free. They'll run that report, and you can take a look at it to give you those kind of insights. Go back on the question again, Eugene. It was about essential metrics. You talked about gross profits per employee. If you had other essential metrics that you could throw out at people. Yeah, so the 7 that are on that cash flow story are critical. The ones that are at the top of those columns, and gross margin dollar per employee, revenue per employee, or profit per employee really give you a sense that you're getting the productivity out of the labor force that you need, because a lot of us have been just throwing people at the problem. And you've got some air coverage right now in order to right size, which is what you're seeing a lot of the Fortune 500 companies are doing. But when it comes to the essential KPI, that's why we like to refer to the book Moneyball, or if you've seen the movie. There was an industry, the baseball industry, that measured everything for 100 years and actually set compensation and talent selection based on stats that they later found didn't correlate to any outcomes. And that's what happened with John Ratliff. John's call center industry ended up being one of the most measured of any industry. In fact, John was on his industry association board that set this, what they call gold award. And what they would do is they'd call into your call center, and they would then rate that call on 24 different measures. And depending on how well you did, when you came to the big industry association meeting, you'd get these gold awards. And John was so enamored by it that he decided that his 24 different locations would be measured by the same set of statistics. And he went to great expense to mystery shop all of his 500 plus call center reps and use it then to evaluate the leadership of each one of his 24 locations until he read Moneyball. And he woke up about 2:00 in the morning and had one of those, oh my gosh, hit your forehead moments, and wondered if all of that he was measuring correlated to anything that mattered. So the next morning he gets to Kevin O'Connor. Kevin's now the president of our global coaching organization as well. Kevin was his Tim Cook, his number 2, that really made sure the trains ran on time, that all this stuff was executed. And he said, Kevin, let's do a quick correlation. Let's look at customer retention, which is as if not more difficult than employee retention in call center business, because people can go any place. Let's correlate customer retention, which they had good numbers on, against this quality score for each one of our 24 locations. And you know what? Life is funny and strange. When they looked at the data, come to find out their location that had the highest quality score among these 24 factors had the lowest customer retention. And his site that had the lowest quality score had the highest customer retention. And it was a scatter diagram in between.
And it made him go out and say, all right, we clearly are not measuring anything that matters here. And they ultimately found their Moneyball stat. Now, it happened to be the ENPS, their Employee Net Promoter Score. And I know it sounds strange, but happy employees lead to happy customers. And when you've got such a transactional business as John had, answering, phones for tens of thousands of companies, simply focusing all his leadership on what did it take to make sure that his call center reps were happy in their jobs led then to the kind of results. First, employee retention and the profitability that I shared here at the beginning of this webinar. So ultimately, it's your job individually to figure out what are those one or two Moneyball stats for each one of your senior leadership team representing your functions, for each one of the key processes, and to the extent you can find the overall Moneyball stat for the organization. Looking at the data as you will through Align's scoreboard will begin to give you those insights and allow you to make those correlations. Awesome. Eugene, next.
Yeah, we got one more question, and I'm going to tie this question together.
Right.
It's a question that's based on how do you get employees to have an ownership mindset? How do we get them engaged into believing and thinking that they are owners of the business? And one of the terms that you mentioned was creating a culture of transparency, a culture of visibility, and a culture of accountability. So just speak to the role that accountability can play in strategic execution and giving employees a sense of ownership where they are assigned specific priorities, assigned a critical number that they own themselves, and making sure that everyone has access and visibility into how we are all performing as a team so that we can all work together.
Yeah. Well, Eugene, I think you answered it. And
I didn't mean
but I don't think we have to look any further than, again, professional sports. And we've used that analogy in our Scaling Up Compensation book as well. First of all, not every player playing the same position for the same team is being paid the same amount of money. I mean, the pay band differential can be 10x, if not 100x. And it is very, very clear to every one of the players, whether they're performing or not. They can answer that key question, which we ask on the Rockefeller Habits checklist. Can everybody quantitatively say, did I have a good day or a good week? Did I have a good game? And because of the amount of effort that's put into tracking those stats. And by the way, those stats aren't then shared at the end of the game or a week later. They're ongoing real time that all the players are looking at. You see the quarterbacks come off the field, and the first thing they do is they pick up their tablet and they begin to review the last play, see what's going on with the offense, defense, gathering, that intel and looking at where they're at and making quick adjustments. And that's why it's important that you've got clarity around what is it everybody needs to achieve so they know they've had a good day or week, and then they know the score real time. And that's what they've got at Red Balloon. They've got that at K1. They've got that at Benetton and now Levi's and the like. That accountability and transparency, that F and T of the word FAST, is what then drives people's sense that at least I want to perform well for the rest of my team. And that's what I want to finish with here. The research is clear. Your people are willing to work much harder for each other than you, the boss. They learn more from each other than you as the boss, and they care more for each other than you. That's just the reality the research shows. And so the extent that you can have that shared information, and so everybody can feel the most powerful thing that we've got as a tool to drive success, that is peer pressure, the more you're going to be able to keep people engaged and moving forward.
Sounds great. As you've always said, we're psychological beings, and so nobody wants to be in the red, and it drives execution. So anyway, we've reached the end of our hour. For those of you who are still with us, if you aren't already using the Align software or one of our other software applications, including the Scaling Up Scoreboard, and want to learn more, you can go to aligntoday.com or scalingup.com. If you want to learn more about the methodology, Mastering the Rockefeller Habits is a great book. Scaling Up is a wonderful book. You can obviously also go to scalingup.com. There's lots of resources that are available to you there, including a link to the upcoming masterclass that Verne mentioned during the early part of his presentation. Anyway, I hope everyone has enjoyed this presentation. Oh, there I am twice. Anyway, thank you, Verne, again for doing this, for spending the time with us, for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom. We always appreciate it. We hope you have a wonderful holiday, and thank you, everybody, until we see you next time. Take care.
All right. Good luck.